Okay, finally, a few useful but much less frequently used controls. There are file upload controls that lets the user interactively select a file. The file name will be displayed in the text field, but the file contents will be sent to the server on a normal form submit, but it's trickier to do that with JavaScript. Server-side image maps that when you click on an image, the location of the click gets sent to the server. You can also read that from JavaScript. Hidden fields. Now, hidden fields are widely used in normal form submissions, and they do things like track a session ID. When the user first arrives, you assign a value to the hidden field, and then you keep track of that over time, and so you can use that to remember like what's in their shopping cart. But with AJAX applications, it's not so important because the JavaScript code can send any value that it wants to anyway. So hidden fields are still sometimes used with JavaScript. In particular, if the hidden field is part of the initial form, JavaScript can read it and maybe decide what to do. But JavaScript code can send anything they want, and the JavaScript code can remember some information anyway, and so it's a little bit less common to use hidden fields with JavaScript than with normal form submissions. And finally, almost all of the input elements, input type equals submit, input type equals text, input type equals password, and so forth, have an attribute called tab index, where you can control if the end user actually hits tab, the tab key on the keyboard, which one will get the focus, what order will the focus appear in, rather than the order that they're listed in the form. Next, the label tag. The label tag is interesting because it doesn't change the visual look of anything in the page. And so many HTML developers think that the label tag has no particular purpose. But the idea is that if you use the label tag, the text, the prompt in front of a text field, usually in front, it could be after, but usually in front, like first name, is more closely associated with the text field itself. And this has a benefit in two ways. One, if you click on the text, the form element is selected. This is very valuable with checkboxes and radio buttons because now clicking on the text, you don't quite have to so accurately click on the button, will toggle the value of the radio button or the checkbox. This is also useful if you want to make the page accessible to visually impaired users or accessible to a program that analyzes the page. By using label, it's very clear which is the label of the input field and which is some random HTML that just happens to come earlier. So it's a good practice to use the label tag. And it can be used in two ways. One way is to give an ID to the input field, and then you say for. Now this does have the danger that it doesn't really force you to put the label anywhere near to the input field. And if you have a label that's way up in the page and it corresponds to an input field that's down later, that's kind of confusing. But the normal practice is it's right before, occasionally right after, but usually right before. And so the for matches the ID of the input field. A lot of people find that very natural. It's right before. But some people say, well, why am I giving it an ID when I don't really need to uniquely identify it? And what if I have two forms? I need to make sure that the IDs across the multiple forms are unique. Well, okay, if that bothers you, you can use the second approach, where you enclose an input field inside the label tag. Now, many people have argued it should have been the other way around. You should have had an input that could enclose a label, but whether you could or not, this is the way it's available in HTML. So do it whichever way you want. I tend to prefer the first way, although there are some sort of purist arguments that, sound pretty reasonable that says that the second way is more logical. But whether it's more logical or not, I think that the first way is a little more common. But either way, using label is a good practice in real life so that the user can click on the text to toggle radio buttons or checkboxes, and so that assistive technology can determine the meaning, the semantics of the page, and see what's the label of the button, the prompt for the button, or the text field, rather than some random HTML that just appeared earlier in the page. All right, BR, we've seen that before. That is a line break. But there are some additional features of BR that we hadn't mentioned earlier that I would like to mention now. One is that if you have start P, NP, you get a blank line. But if you put start P, NP, start P, NP, start P, NP, start P, NP 10 times, you would think you would get 10 blank lines, but you don't. But if you put 10 BRs on top of each other, don't forget this little slash here so that you're consistent with the rules of XML, then you do get 10 line breaks in a row. The other thing that's worth talking about here that we hadn't really mentioned more than just briefly earlier is there's an option. You can say BR space clear equals all. Normally, BR just puts in a line break. But what if the paragraph above has an image or a table with a line equals to the left or a line equals right, which means that the image might possibly hang down into the following paragraph? Often that's good and you want it and it's okay. But if you want to start a paragraph where no tables or images can hang down from the previous paragraph, then you say BR clear equals all, which puts at least one line break in, but if there's some hanging images, it moves the text down even further so the tables or the images don't hang into the next paragraph. Okay, so the normal usage is just BR, but don't forget that slash inside. But if you want to skip past hanging images or tables, you can say BR clear equals all. All right, BR is useful. HR is also useful. BR means line break. HR means horizontal rule. Draw just a horizontal line across the page that looks kind of etched in 3D, just like the line in a field set in Legend looks like it's etched in 3D. It's just a kind of nice divider that looks visually appealing. So it just draws a horizontal line. HR means horizontal rule, like, a rule from a ruler, drawing a line. And the most common use is just take up the full width of whatever HTML element this is inside, but you can also give a width in various different units. The most useful probably is percentage. So back in the previous example where I showed field set in Legend, it also had an HR inside. And you get this little 3D etched looking horizontal line. Not earth-shaking, but it's quite useful and used moderately often in real life.